Good afternoon. So this afternoon I'll be sharing with you as a supplementary about the report of Edsel regarding the theory of evolution. So the proponent of this theory is Darwin. We can call also this is all about Darwinism. So what about this Darwin's theory of evolution? When I talk about evolution, this is a change over time. It is the process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. A scientific theory which is a well-supported, testable explanation of phenomena that have occurred in the natural world. So this is about evolution. Then the question, how do we think Darwin came up with this theory? So once again, how do you think Darwin came up with this theory? I think when you were still in high school, or from your readings, you encountered this man Darwin, especially, yes, about evolution. So that's why the question is, how do you think Darwin came up with this theory? So we move on. So Darwin, during his lifetime, naglalakbay ito siya using this beagle as a boat. So saan siya naglalakbay? He roamed around the world, a tour around the world. Then, his voyage using the Beagle, the date is February 12, 1831, and of course he was the captain. Then with the ship HMS Beagle. Then their destination is voyage around the world. So, nag-iikot siya. Then the findings of this journey of Darwin evidence to propose a revolutionary hypothesis about how life changes over time. So, yun yung gusto niya. Then, so this is the map where he traveled around the world, Australia, until he was able to arrive I think this Galapagos Island. That was the last. Then the pattern of diversity. Darwin visited Argentina and Australia, which had similar grassland ecosystem. So yun yung nakita niya. Australia and Argentina, pare-pareho yung ecosystem when you talk about the grassland. Then those grasslands were inhabited by a very different animals. Neither Argentina or Australia was home to sorts of animals that live in a European grasslands. Then Darwin posed challenging questions. So after those visitation, after those observation, he has these questions. Why were there no rabbits in Australia despite the presence of habitats that seem perfect for them? Then the second question, why were there no kangaroos in England? Because we know very well that Australia, ang dami-daming mga kangaroos doon. Well known sila doon. Then sabi niya, what about in England? Bakit wala? Then, regarding the living organisms and fossils, Darwin collected the preserved remains of ancient organisms. So the remains, this is called as the fossils. The preserved remains of the ancient organisms is called the fossils. Some of those fossils resembled organisms that were still alive today. So until today, nandoon pa rin yung ibang living organisms. But remember, this is 1831. It was in 18th century. Then others look completely unlike any creature he had ever seen. As Darwin studied the fossils, new questions arose. So after those two questions, while he studied the fossils, another questions. Why had so many of these species disappeared? Then how were they related to living species? So that was another questions of were questions of Darwin after studying or experimenting the fossils. So these are the example of fossils, the remains of ancient organisms. May shell dyan, may mga buto-buto dyan, and the rest. Then when he arrived at Galapagos Island, ito yung mga nakita. The lowest islands were hot, dry, and nearly barren wood, island sparse vegetation. So yun yung Galapagos Island. Then the higher islands had greater rainfall and different assortment of plants and animals. Like Isabella, the island had rich vegetation. So he was able to compare. Pag mababa, iyon, barren wood, sparse vegetation. Pag doon naman sa medyo mataas-taas, may ulan, then ang plants ayos na ayos as well as the animals. Then Darwin, fascinated in particular by the land tortoise and marine iguanas in the Galapagos. So yan, medyo namangha siya. Then the giant tortoise varied in predictable ways from one island to another. Then the shape of a tortoise shell could be used to identify which island a particular tortoise inhabited. So these are the picture of the tortoise in which nakita niya. Iba-ibang shape. Then, ito yung mga animals that can be found in Galapagos Island. The land tortoise, the finches, or they call it Darwin finches, the blue-footed booby, as well as the marine iguana. So ano itong mga itsura nila? Ayan. The tortoise, the Darwin finches, tingnan mo yon, nasa bird, parang bird siya. Then another bird, which is the blue-footed, the booby, as well as the iguana. So these are the animals na nakita niya doon sa Galapagos Island. Then, after that, bumalik siya sa kanyang pinanggalingan. In the journey home, Darwin observed that characteristic of many plants and animals vary greatly among the islands. So iba-iba. Iba-ibang lugar, iba-ibang isla. So nakita niya, iba-iba din the shape, mga forma ng mga animals. Then he has this hypothesis. Separate species may have arose from an original ancestor. Then, there are other scientists and scientists who shaped Darwin's thinking. So they gave their own idea. An example of this is James Hutton. In 1975, the theory of geological change. And he said, forces change Earth's surface shape. So yun yung according to James. Then, changes are slow. Then, another Earth much older than thousands of years. So that was the idea of James Hutton coming from Darwin's thinking about changes, about evolution. Then another man by the name of Charles Lyell, in his book, The Principles of Geography, he said that geographical features can be built up or torn down. Then Darwin's thought, if Earth changed over time, what about life? So that was also the idea of Charles. Another is Lamarck. According to Lamarck's theory of evolution, the tendency towards perfection. So he has another experimentation like the giraffe. Bakit pahaba ng pahaba daw? Then with the use and disuse with the birds using 4 arms, then the inheritance of the acquired traits. So look at this one. The original giraffe, then hinay-hinay daw yung changes, pataas ng pataas, that was his theory. And we know, may mga giraffe din tayo in Palawan. Pag hindi man tayo, hindi pa nakakita doon, but I think it's in Palawan, may giraffe. In the other countries, of course, may giraffe. Then pahaba ng pahaba, kahoy kasi mga dahon ng kahoy yung kanilang kinakain. So that was the theory according to this man, Lamarck's theory of evolution. Yan. Look at this one, nagbabago siya. Isa, nanganak siya. Then look at yung parang gunting. Pang-ipit ng, anong term natin dyan? Kasag, alimango, piyo, basta family yan sila. Okay. Then, another man, regarding the population of growth, according to Thomas Malthus, in 19th century, he was a 19th century English economist. According to him, if population grow, more babies born than die. Yes, that's his thinking. Then, insufficient living space, pag madaming tao, then food runs out, pag dami-dami ng population, then Darwin applied this theory to animals. So, from the human to animals, that according to him, si Darwin, ina-apply daw niya ito. Pag maraming ipinanganak, then mayroon ding namamatay. Pero pag sobrang dami, so wala ng lugar, insufficient na yung space natin, and of course, food runs out. Then, another is Russell Wallace. He wrote an essay summarizing evolutionary change from his field work in Malaysia. So, another naman na scientist. Then, gave Darwin the drive to publish his findings. So, from Darwin, he supported itong theory ni Darwin. Nag-support naman ito si Wallace naman. Then, sabi nga, gave Darwin the drive to publish his findings. Then now, they come up with this natural selection or the artificial selection. The natural variation differences among animals of a species. So, natural variation, magkaiba-iba, mga hayop with the different species, of course. Then, we have also the artificial selection. The nature provides variation among different organisms, and humans selected those variations they find useful. So, once again, this artificial selection, nature provides the variation among different organisms. Para bang, it's part of the nature, it's an innate sa mga organisms na yon, yung mga variation nila. Then, nasa tao na, that humans select those variations, they find it useful. If it is useful, yun yung pinipili nila. Then, regarding the evolution by natural selection, the struggle for existence, members of its species have to compete for food, shelter, other than life necessities. Then another thing which is you are familiar, the survival of the fittest. Some individuals better suited for the environment. Ano itong survival of the fittest? I think you are familiar with this. Parang matira ang matibay, kung sino yung nakakarami, sila yung, of course, maghahari. Okay? Itong survival of the fittest. When they talk about the inhabitants, yung nasa sa environment. If it is the animals, yan. I think you notice yung Discovery Channel, yung sa Geographic, may mga channel dyan about the animals. Kita ninyo sino yung mas marami, sila yung parang dominante. Okay? That's all about the survival of the fittest. Then this natural selection, over time, natural selection results in the changes in the inherited characteristics of the population. These changes increase in the specific fitness in its in its environment. So, natural selection, pwede daw itong mangyari over time. Pero kaya nga, nandoon na sa kung saan sila naninirahan as a result in the inherited characteristics of the so-called population. Then we have the so-called descent. The descent with modification. Its living organisms has descended with changes from other species over time. Then we have also the so-called the common descent were derived from the common ancestors. So you look at the drawing, the descent with modification as well as the common descent from the ancestors. So nagbabago, may evolution din. Okay? Then evidence of evolution. From the study of course, Darwin yung the fossil record, mayroon sila dyan. You remember yung shell, tsaka yung mga bones. Then the geographic distribution of living things, the homologous body structures, then similarities of early development. So, isa-isahin yan. When we talk about fossil record, layer show chains. That's the evidence. You look at the drawing. Then geographic distribution of living things, then the homologous body structures, then similarities of the development. Next is the geographic distribution of things. This is similar environments have similar types of organisms. I think you would agree with that. Kasi sabi natin kanina, because of the survival of the fittest, kung sino yung nakakarami, then similar, sabi nga with this distribution of living things, similar environments have similar types of organisms. So that's an evidence of evolution. Another thing, homologous structure. The structures that have different mature forms in the different organisms but develop from the same embryonic tissue. I think science, din lahat kayo, nasa field kayo of science, especially you in the field of medicine, alam na alam nyo ito. Homologous, pare-pareho ang structure that have different mature forms from the different organisms but develop from the same embryonic tissue. So galing yan siya, parehong embryonic tissue, then na-form, so nagbabago siya. Kaya there is changes from maliit, palaki ng palaki, but it started with the same embryonic tissue. Like this one, galing sa maliit hanggang palaki ng palaki. Ang kuko, 1, 2, 5, paliit ng paliit din nagbabago. That's homologous changes from sa isang embryonic tissue. Then another evidence, the vestigial organs. Organs that serve no useful functions in an organism. Like sa atin, an example nga, di ba, until today, they do not know what's the function of itong ating appendix. Kaya anytime, kahit na hindi ka, wala kang, yung may appendix ka, pero magka-appendicitis ka, tinatanggal yon para, well, wala namang function. Okay? Until today, hindi yan na-discover walang function, but we do not know. Our creator, mayroon yan. Pero hindi pa nga na-describe in science. Wala naman, pwede yang tanggalin. So that's also an evidence of evolution. Parang tumubo lang din. The miniature legs, the arms, di ba minsan may tumutubo din, dagdag dito. Okay? So, yon. Parang wala namang function. Napansin ninyo, minsan may dagdag yung mga daliri dito, ganyan. Or dito. Pwede namang tanggalin yon. Walang function. That's more on the vestigial organ. Yan. Sample. May mata. Ang B, wala namang mata. Meron bang walang mata? Meron, sure, nila nakikita. Pero, look at the evolution, the changes. Then another similarities of early development. Ang fish, the reptile, the bird, the humans. Comparative embryology. Tingnan nyo, halos pare-pareho. Pero kaya nga, magbabago yan palaki ng palaki. Sabi natin yung kanya yung more or less the same embryonic tissue, pero nagbabago habang palaki ng palaki. Fish, reptile, bird, humans. Look at the tsura nila. Pare-pareho. Okay? Kaya nga, may nagsasabi tayo about this Darwinism, galing daw tayo sa unggoy. I don't know. But for us believers in our subject, creation and its social responsibility about creation, hindi tayo galing sa unggoy, but we came from our Creator, we came from God. Pero dito, in this, kaya nga, pinasok itong theory of evolution para makita natin yon. Ngayon, kikita natin. The same embryonic tissue, the similarity, at saka i-compare din natin, compatibility, halos pare-pareho. Then, because of the evolution, because of changes over time, nagbabago siya. The structure at saka yung iba't ibang itsura. Then, as a summary of Darwin's theory, take note, individuals in nature differ from one another. So, that's why we are unique. Once again, individuals in nature differ from one another. You are unique, I am unique. Magkaiba tayo. Okay? Then organisms in nature produce more offsprings than can survive. And many of those who do not survive do not reproduce. So papasok na lalim survival of the fittest. Sinong mas malakas, sila yon ang mag-dominate. Then, because more organisms are produced than can survive, each species must struggle for resources. And which is true. Even today, if you go to yung, especially in Africa, sabi ko makita natin sa TV, National Geographic, sa Discovery Channel, kita natin yon na organisms are produced than can survive. Each species must struggle for resources. Kasi minsan wala na makakain. Kita niyo sabi kanina sa isang scientist, we run out of food kung sobra ng dami ang mga living organisms including us human beings. Then each organism is unique. Each has advantages and disadvantages in the struggle for existence. So doon ito papasok. May advantages, may disadvantages. Pero yung sabi natin in our previous lesson, as a believer, we are the steward of God. Tayo yung tagamantay of all living creatures, living things. Okay? Because we are given the intellect as well as the will. Okay? Tayo yon dapat. Pero anong ginagawa? Sinisira yung environment. Nagiging irresponsible ang mga tao. Okay? Next, individuals best suited for the environment survive and reproduce most successful. Then, species change over time. That was the theory of evolution according to Darwin. Then another species alive today descended with modification from species that live in the past. So once again, the species alive today descended from modification from species that live in the past. Then all organisms on Earth are united into a single family tree of life by common descent. Remember the common descent? Okay. Sabi dito, as a summary, all organisms on Earth are united in a single family tree of life by common descent. I don't know kung maniwala kayo dito as believer. Yan. You look at the last slide. Tingnan nyo. Yung maliit pa ito siguro, I think pare-pareho yung sabi, the same embryonic tissue, then habang nag-i-evolve, changes over time, nagbabago. When you took up your biology in high school, yung biology, di ba? Yung tao, naalaala ninyo yun? From ape, then nag-ano siya, level up, nag-i-evolve, nagiging tao. Kaya may mga joke ngayon, may mga tao pa rin na hindi nag-level up. Nag-level up sa itsura, nag-level up sa pag-uugali. Kasi may mga ugaling unggoy, hindi lang yung mga itsura. But that's only a joke. But we know that as believer, now you know on the part of science, especially the origin, especially itong tinatawag ng evolution of Darwin. Then by next meeting, hopefully yung ating reporter may ma-reproduce at sana, kung gusto man ninyo na sinasabing mag-Google Meet tayo, mag-online tayo, just inform us, the reporters. Ngayon, it's sad to note na si Edsel nag-prepare, pero dalawa lang kami. Sabi ko, na bakit mag one-on-one lang tayo? Si Saada, siguro may problema sa interconnection na wala. That's why I decided na as a supplement, yung gisend ni Edsel, dinagdagan ko lang about the report of Darwinism or the theory of evolution. And I hope you learn something. Then the next reporters, once again, please prepare. So we'll see each other next week, next Sunday. So God bless you and please answer yung inihanda ni Edsel, yung 3 questions. Thank you very much.